Let's begin our discussion of organic molecules. First, let's go back and remind ourselves of what the difference is between inorganic and organic. So starting with inorganic molecules. Inorganic molecules are typically smaller, only a few atoms usually. Those atoms are ions that are being held together using ionic bonds. We've seen some examples: sodium chloride, potassium chloride, calcium carbonate. Those are all inorganic. Typically, we associate most of the inorganic material on Earth as non-living. Okay, so we find most of the inorganic molecules in Earth, in non-living matter, whereas organic molecules are typically found in living organisms. Doesn't mean we don't require inorganic molecules. In fact, when you take a nutrition class, we call them minerals. So in our diet, we require organic molecules like carbohydrates, protein, lipids, vitamins are organic. We also require minerals. Minerals are the inorganic molecules. We often call them electrolytes. So those three words are all kind of synonymous. They're the same molecules: inorganic, electrolytes, and minerals. But let's look at the organic molecules. Compared to inorganic, they're typically much larger molecules. They have a high amount of carbons and hydrogens. There's other atoms, but the backbone of these molecules are carbon and hydrogen. They all have derived somehow from photosynthesis. So we rely on plants and other photosynthetic organisms to produce carbon-hydrogen molecules. And then, depending on the organism, you can change those molecules a bit into the exact molecules you require. So if we first look at organic molecules, we divide that topic into four. You have carbohydrates, protein, lipids, and nucleic acids. What we're looking at here are some carbohydrates. These are actually known as monosaccharides because they're a single unit. So carbohydrates can be a single unit or many units, all bonded together. A couple different ways to draw them. So notice here, they've drawn out all the atoms in that monosaccharide. Here it's a slightly different version. But you'll notice that glucose, fructose, and galactose are all single units. And the home run here is a certain unit. Most sugars, most carbohydrates, the single unit contains 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. So if you write that down, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. That's a single monosaccharide unit. There's a few variations, but those are what glucose, fructose, and galactose are. So glucose is blood sugar. We need that baby. Glucose is circulating throughout your blood right now, supplying your cells with energy. So that's our primary source of energy. We use glucose to make most of our ATP. Fructose is often referred to as fruit sugar. It's found in a lot of fruits. Our body does have some fructose in it. And then galactose. Galactose is often found in milk. It's one component of lactose. But lactose is a disaccharide. Lactose is one galactose unit bonded to one glucose unit. Sucrose, table sugar, that's a disaccharide. Sucrose is glucose bonded to fructose. And then there's another one known as maltose. Maltose is 2 glucose units bonded together. So these are monosaccharides. The most important one is glucose. We get these from our carbohydrates in our diet. They usually aren't in this form. They're usually in larger polysaccharides, and we have to digest them down into our monosaccharides. So here's kind of showing how two monosaccharides might be bonded together to form a disaccharide. So here's glucose. There's that magical unit, 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. If we bond it to another monosaccharide, fructose, notice it's the same formula. They're just arranged slightly different. When those two molecules get bonded together, it forms sucrose, which is glucose and fructose covalently bonded. We can also do that with galactose and glucose to form lactose. And glucose is called maltose. So now we know the 3 primary monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And now we know the 3 primary disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Collectively, monosaccharides and disaccharides are often referred to as simple sugars. If you were taking a nutrition class, your nutrition professor would say you need to minimize how many of these are in your diet. These are quote unquote the bad sugars because they will lead to a spike in your blood sugar. And when the body has a dramatic spike in blood sugar, the pancreas has to produce more insulin to lower that blood sugar. And if the body keeps producing large amounts of insulin, that can contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. We'll talk a lot more about type 2 diabetes in AMP2 because it's a hormone. Insulin's a hormone, and we learn about the endocrine system in AMP2. Here is a polysaccharide. So these are all single glucose monomers covalently bonded together. And when you covalently bond many glucose monomers together, you form a poly means many, saccharide. Saccharide means sugar. The major important polysaccharide in humans is called glycogen. That's Glycogen, glycogen. That's how we store large amounts of glucose. 2 organs store glycogen. Skeletal muscle, because skeletal muscle needs a lot of energy, and the liver. The liver is extremely important in storing glucose and then releasing it when needed. Again, we'll talk more about that when we get into AMP2. But this is a good example of what glycogen would look like. Here's a summary table of the different types of carbohydrates. You'll notice that we have the monosaccharides, glucose being the #1 monosaccharide, blood sugar. We have the disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And then we have the polysaccharides. There's that important glycogen molecule, stored form of carbohydrates in animals. In plants, we call it starch. Slightly different molecule. Same idea. It's a way to store large amounts of glucose in the cell. There's another form of a polysaccharide you've probably heard of, cellulose. That's a part of plants, plant cell walls. In nutrition, we would call that dietary fiber. We cannot digest cellulose, so it kind of goes right through the GI tract. It's very important. It helps aid the movement of food, but we don't have the enzymes to digest cellulose. We do have enzymes to digest starch. We can break starch down and absorb the glucose. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about lipids.